Hello everyone, welcome back to another tier list ranking video. Today we'll be continuing on from point guards and doing shooting guards. If you do go on to enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. With that being said, let's get ahead and go right into it. So Klay Thompson, of course, will not be available for the start of the NBA season, but will return sometime in December. And for now, he has to go in the All-Star tab for me. He's never been a superstar. And ultimately, I'm just going to put him where he was when he was last healthy. But ultimately, it's a bit hard to say exactly where the production and play of Klay Thompson will be. Bradley Beal, you could argue is all-star, you could argue is superstar. Personally, for me, he goes in the all-star tab. I do have a fairly strict threshold for what I consider a superstar, and ultimately Bradley Beal hasn't led to enough winning in his career at this point in time for me to believe that he is a superstar and doesn't impact the defensive end enough. Ultimately, I think Bradley Beal is a very good player, but I don't have him as a superstar in the NBA because I only consider about 7 or 8 players in the league to be superstars. James Harden, however, is one of those, and although he was on my point guard list, he does show up here again. Ultimately, I do not choose the players that are down at the bottom, I just choose the tiers on the left. And ultimately, James Harden gets in as a superstar caliber player again. Terry Rozier, above average starter for me. You could argue all-star, but personally, I don't really think there's a strong case for that. A solid score, give you a little bit of defense, had a much better year last year than he did the year before, and got paid deservingly so because of it. Josh Richardson, for me right now, has to be a below average starter. He's fine. But outside of the bit of defense he gives you, which even then isn't at an elite level, his offense really just hasn't been there the last few years. He's a fine player. He's a fine role player. And I think he'll do better in Boston than he did in Dallas, just based on the role that he'll have and the role that they'll ask him to play. But ultimately, I don't love him as an amazing starter. I think he's a below average starter, a fine one, and I think a good fit on this Boston team, whether he starts or comes off the bench. Of course, listed as a starter here, but ultimately, below average starter for me. Evan Fournier, you could make the case for average or above average. I'm a little bit on the fence with him. I don't mind his length. He can give you a little bit on the defensive end, but primarily a scorer. Ultimately, I think I'd have to put him in the above average. But I'm really torn between him being above average or average. Again, that's one of those guys you can just make the case for me either way down in the comment section, depending on how you feel. But he's in between either way. Fine score, but nothing amazing. Seth Curry. No, I had to put Evan Fournier in the average starter category. He just has to, because Seth Curry then goes in the average starter category as well. And Seth Curry, to me, last year was a better three-point shooter and scorer than Evan Fournier was. Just in a less significant role than Devin Fournier had in Orlando and Boston, where his scoring was needed more than Seth Curry's was in Philadelphia. But ultimately, Seth Curry knows how to score the bucket, and I don't think there's much of a difference between Evan Fournier and Seth Curry. And I don't feel the same way about Seth Curry being in the above-average starter. So ultimately, that's where I think they both end up. Gary Trent for me right now is just an average starter as well. Good three-point shooter, good on-ball defender. But that's about it. He does need to improve a lot on the rest of his offensive game. He has some flashes of that throughout the preseason, but ultimately that's where he lies for me for now. Zach Levine is an all-star, no doubt about it, knows how to score a bucket, and regular NBA media finally noticed that last year, that he was just more than a dunker, even though he's been that for 3 to 4 years now. But at least he's finally getting the credit he deserves. Colin Sexton, above average starter. I know there'll be some people that think he's an amazing scorer and should be higher, and I also know that there'll be people that recognize that he doesn't necessarily have the best on-court relationships with some people reportedly, although some of those reports are a little bit uncredible to say the least, and there's some hesitancy to pay him from Cleveland's standpoint, but ultimately he knows how to put the ball in the bucket at a very high level, so ultimately I think I put him in an above average category. Here, I don't know why Killian Hayes is listed at the 2. I suppose they had Cade Cunningham at the 1, but ultimately below average for me, just because I haven't seen enough from Killian Hayes right now. As I mentioned in my point guard list, any rookies are being put in the below average starter category for this year, and then next year's tier ranking list and will be updated based on their play in their rookie year. But ultimately, Killian Hayes really hasn't played that much and didn't even show anything great in his rookie year so far. So for me, he has to be a below average starter. Caris LeVert for me is an above average starter. You can make the argument for all-star, but ultimately I think he's a fine player. I haven't seen enough from him in the last couple of years, unfortunately, just due to injury, to put him in that all-star tab, but he knows how to score the bucket. I think it's going to be a very important piece of this Indiana Pacers team. DiVincenzo's an average starter for me. He's fine. I think he's better than the likes of your Josh Richardsons and Killian Hayes we have down in the below average starter category. But I don't think he's anything amazing. I think he's just a fine starting shooting guard. Fits well in this Bucks team. Bogdanovich, based on the season he had last year, for me has to be above average starter. Once he came back from injury, he was extremely productive, extremely efficient, and was arguably the most consistent player for the Hawks throughout the regular season as far as scoring goes. So that's where he ends up for me. Oladipo is, for me, one of the hardest players to rank out of this group, just because he hasn't played that great when he's played over the last couple of years, and he has been injured often. Because of that, for me, he just has to be an average starter. Make the case for him wherever you want him to be. Based on when he was with Indiana, yeah, he was up here, and then he was down here, and now he just kind of keeps sliding down because he hasn't looked great since his injury and just continues to get injured, unfortunately. So that's just where I have him. No indicative of his play, because when he was last healthy, he was extremely good. But unfortunately, that's quite a few years ago, and his play last year was underwhelming. Jalen Suggs is a rookie we will put in the below average starter category for now. Will Barton is an average starter for me. Fine offensively, fine defensively, nothing great. Minnesota, when you're talking about Malik Beasley, fine scorer, actually a fairly good scorer, can get you 20 points a night in the right situation. You can make the argument between above average or average starter for him. I think for me, I'd put him in the above average, but I don't feel too confident about either. SGA is a tweener for me between above average and all-star. I think at the end of this season, I will comfortably have SGA in the all-star tier, but ultimately for right now, based on the fact that he just hasn't shown enough for me yet to put him in the all-star tier, I think I will have him in the above average tier. But within about 30 games into the NBA season, I would fully expect, if I redid that ranking then, that I would have him in the all-star tier. CJ McCollum, above average. Again, right on the top of that above average tier. You can make the argument for all-star, but with this poor defense and very good scoring, but not elite scoring, I currently have him in the above average starter category. Donovan Mitchell, all-star, no doubt about it. Superstar in the playoffs, all-star in the regular season. Carries the offensive load for this Utah team as much as it is a good team offense. It moves the ball and shoots a lot of threes. When this team needs a bucket, this team relies on Donovan Mitchell, and the offense revolves around Donovan Mitchell, especially in the playoffs. So ultimately, is very well deserving of that spot. Paul George, again, for me, an all-star. Some people might have him in the superstars tier, but as I mentioned, I don't consider that many players in the NBA to be superstars. And ultimately, Paul George, as of right now, is not one of those players I consider to be that. But depending on how he plays without Kawhi Leonard this upcoming season, he could certainly change that. Devin Booker is also an all-star for me. Had a very good playoff run, one of the best for a young player first time in the postseason, him and DeAndre and alike. And to have continued success with this Phoenix Suns group for the upcoming season. Aries Halliburton, currently average starter, has the upside to be a lot more than that. I really like what I saw from him in his rookie year. I think he's going to take another step forward in a bigger role this upcoming season. Tim Hardaway Jr., average starter for me, had a very good offensive year last year. Very good from mid-range, very good from three. I struggle to believe that we're going to see as good of an offensive season from him this year, as consistent and efficient as it was. Maybe Tim Hardaway Jr. is turning the corner in terms of his efficiency and consistency, but ultimately I don't consider him to be an above average starter at this point in time. Jalen Green, rookie, going in the below average category. Desmond Bane of the Memphis Grizzlies, I think it's going to take a nice step forward this year, but for me, for now, he's still an average starter. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, for me, again, has to be an above average starter for now, but I think has the upside to be an above average starter to even all-star caliber, depending on how much work he puts in. and is one of my favorite candidates for most improved player for the upcoming season, but ultimately he does end up in the average starter category for now. Wayne Ellington of the LA Lakers, a below average starter for me, can give you a little bit of three-point shooting, but other than that, isn't doing anything great for you. And at this point in time in his career, I don't love him as a starter, specifically on a team that is hoping to win a title. And then for the Spurs here, this is, of course, Devin Vassell, I believe, but Derek White is going to be their starting shooting guard, so just pretend this is Derek White. Average starter for me, can shoot the three well, can defend well, but ultimately outside of that isn't doing anything else outside of that at a high rate, and so ultimately is going to be an average starter for me. So as you see, the shooting guard position is filled with not many superstars, but a lot of high-end all-stars and a lot of average players, but there are some players in here who can definitely have some upside moving forward. And look at SGA, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Gary Trent. Definitely an interesting group here as we move forward in this 2021-22 NBA season. Be sure to let me know down in the comment section below some of the arguments you have for some of these guys up or down a tier, as there are definitely a lot of guys you can make arguments for here to move up or down a tier. That being said, if you did enjoy the video, be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you are new. And if you want to check my point guard tier list video, then be sure to click the box on screen. That being said, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.